Good evening and welcome to TVB News. The head of Beijing's liaison office in Hong Kong, Luo Huining, said today the city needs patriotic media that holds on to the truth. Meanwhile, Chief Executive Carrie Lam said the media should safeguard national security, and CE-designate John Lee noted there is boundless room for press freedom as long as the law is observed.
3、2、1。
During the 120th anniversary celebration of Ta Kung Pao, a Chinese-language newspaper today, Luo Huining read out a congratulatory note from President Xi Jinping. There, the state leader stressed how he always cares so much about Hong Kong's development.
尤其需要爱国爱港传媒
Luo said, in a diverse society like Hong Kong, we especially need media outlets that are patriotic, that can hold on to virtue, wash away the dirt to bring in the clean water. He also said, President Xi wrote in the letter that he hopes Ta Kung Pao can write a remarkable chapter to realize the Chinese dream of the great rejuvenation of the nation. These are also words entrusted to all patriotic media and participants who implement one country, two systems, he added. Chief Executive Carrie Lam, meanwhile, took time to explain why the media should take the initiative to safeguard national security.
在这个来之不易的稳定环境下
Lam said the role of the media is particularly important in times of turmoil. She added that aside from monitoring the governance and making good use of press freedom, the media should also obey the law and take the initiative to deliver the public messages related to national security. They should provide the public and audience with accurate, comprehensive, and impartial information, she said. Also delivering a speech was Chief Executive Designate John Lee. He said, as long as the law is observed, freedom of the press is infinite, and that's a standard in line with those adopted by Western nations and advanced places in the world. Lee added the press possesses the power of civic society and therefore has important social responsibility. Following the ceremony, attendants were all given an extra edition of Ta Kung Pao with Xi's note printed on it. With around 3 weeks to go before Chief Executive Carrie Lam finishes her term as the city's leader, she said on a radio program today that her 5-year tenure had been full of ups and downs. Meanwhile, she gave the next administration a piece of advice: not to be afraid of any political struggles. Christy Khan reports.
我哋必須要再次團結起嚟，同行向前。
Chief Executive Carrie Lam used "Reconnect" as her campaign slogan while she joined the CE race back in 2017. But speaking on a radio program today, she said it would be meaningless to hold hands and walk together if the government and the people shared different thoughts. Lam also said she had done various work in the first 2 years of her term in order to push forward the development of the city. However, the social unrest triggered by the now withdrawn extradition bill and also the COVID-19 pandemic caused everything to come to a halt. Furthermore, the chief executive noted there have been people in the city inciting Hong Kong independence. So the enactment of the national security law was a way to bring the city's one country, two systems back to the right track.
美國呢啲制裁呢，我真係好憤怒嘅嚇。
As for the sanctions imposed on her and her officials by the U.S., Lam said the sanctions had brought her and her family closer instead. She added she was angry about the U.S. sanctions as she was just trying to uphold national security in the city with other government officials. She also thanked her colleagues who were also sanctioned because of their devotion to their duties. Meanwhile, she also advised the next-term administration to be courageous and stand up against foreign critics and not to be afraid of political struggles. Talking about the new electoral system, Lam said she is confident that Hong Kong will be able to achieve universal suffrage in the chief executive election under the framework of the Basic Law. Christy Khan, TVB News.
The city reported 814 new COVID infections with more than 100 imported cases. 2 schools reported new clusters, and authorities have stepped up vaccine requirements for specialist outpatient clinics. Jacqueline reports.
For the second day in a row, the city reported over 800 new COVID cases. On the school front, 6 students from Puito Primary School in Matawai have been infected. Holan Kuk Choi Kayao School also saw 4 students test positive. 60 more patients are suspected to carry the Omicron BA.2 subvariant. 5 of them are residents at Kaoshan Terrace of Taikusheng. The rest reside in districts including Wan Chai, Aplei Chau, Homan Tin, Yunlong, and Mongkok. 10 of the cases have no readily traceable sources of infection.
These cases are not concentrated in one particular area. There are cases across the territory. Sewage surveillance always reveals a rise in the viral load. We do not rule out the possibility of further rises in the daily caseload.
Meanwhile, FLM Bar in Shengwan saw 3 patrons and 1 worker infected. So far, it has logged 17 infections among the 100-plus people who recently visited the establishment. Rack City Bar on Wyndham Street Central registered no new infections, but authorities alerted one of the 19 environmental samples which yielded uncertain COVID results from its snooker table. On a bright note, outbreaks at earlier virus-hit bars including Link and Shuffle have likely been contained with no new related diagnoses reported. For the 106 imported infections, 8 were detected 7 days after their arrival, with 7 more suspected repositive cases. Authorities are investigating if one imported case had contracted the virus locally. Meanwhile, starting tomorrow, patients at specialist outpatient clinics will have to fulfill the vaccine pass requirement and hold a negative PCR test result for COVID from within the past 48 hours. Visitors to these patients should also have a valid vaccine pass. The new measure won't be applied to the A&E department and the general outpatient clinics. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
China's Defense Minister Wei Fenghe has accused the United States of trying to hijack the support of countries in the Asia-Pacific in order to turn them against Beijing. Speaking at the Security Forum, the Shangri-La Dialogue, Wei said the U.S. was seeking to advance its own interests under the guise of multilateralism. He added that the U.S. should stop seeking to contain China, stressing that the bilateral relationship could only improve if America strengthened solidarity and opposed confrontation. China has been building relationships with Pacific Island nations and last week broke ground on a contentious expansion project at Cambodia's biggest naval base. In another development, the new Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles held sideline talks with Wei. Marles said the discussion was frank and full and raised the recent incident involving an Australian P-8 aircraft, among other issues. The meeting marks the end of a 2-year freeze in ties. Ukraine says it remains in control of an industrial and chemical plant area in the eastern city of Severodonetsk, which is being bitterly fought over. Hundreds of civilians are sheltering from Russian shelling, this as Russia started handing out passports in some areas of southern Ukraine. Matthew Bray reports.
Северодонецк полностью на 100% не освобожден.
This individual speaking is Leonid Paschinnik, the head of the so-called Lugansk People's Republic. Speaking to reporters, he acknowledged that Severodonetsk is not completely liberated, as he put it. Carrying on, he said that Ukrainian fascists and nationalists remain in the Azot plant, but they should surrender anyway. Another detail offered was that there are roughly 200 to 300 Ukrainian soldiers as POWs currently. Civilians continue to flee the Donetsk region as their lives are torn apart by the conflict in the eastern regions. Most of these people heading west did not leave until the shelling and fighting started encroaching on their homes. Luckily for them, trains are still running and volunteers help them get out. At a village outside of Mariupol, a grave site has been found. Some of the graves are marked with crosses and nameplates, others only have numbers. This local resident, Nikolai Chumak, said Ukrainian tractors began digging the site back in February and March when the Russian invasion began. Russian forces occupying parts of southern Ukraine have begun handing out Russian passports to local residents. In the Kherson region, 23 people accepted the documents. In Melitopol, it appeared the crowds were larger. A Russian official claimed thousands were coming every day. That, of course, can't be substantiated independently. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said the passport distribution was just to a few collaborators, as he described it, and their entourage. Earlier, Zelensky had met with the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Zelensky again called for even stronger sanctions against Russia, and they broached the thorny question of Ukraine's aspirations for EU membership. The president of the European Commission, who made a visit to Kyiv, said membership was a merit-based path and appealed to them to strengthen the rule of law, fight corruption and modernize their institutions.
As you know, the Commission is currently preparing the recommendations, the so-called opinion for the EU member states. We have been working day and night on this assessment, and I promised to you in April, dear Volodymyr, that we will be tirelessly working on it. So the discussions today will enable us to finalize our assessment by the end of next week.
Matthew Bray, TVB News.
Welcome back to TVB News. Thousands of protesters rallied across the United States on Saturday calling for stricter gun control measures. This comes after a string of mass shootings rocked the country. Daniel Rell tells us more.
Politicians, activists and gun violence survivors gathered throughout the US demanding Congress to take bolder action on gun control. The demonstrations come in the wake of a series of brutal mass shootings in the country. One of the attacks, which took place on May 24th in Uvalde, Texas, saw a gunman kill 19 primary school students as well as 2 teachers. According to data from the American Gun Violence Archive, there have been at least 258 mass shootings so far in the US this year. In Washington, D.C., a string of prominent speakers took to the podium to get their anti-gun violence messages across.
I speak as a mayor, a mom, and I speak for millions of Americans and America's mayors who are demanding that Congress do its job. And its job is to protect us, to protect our children from gun violence.
Gun violence is an America's problem, and for too long she has not valued the lives of the black, brown, and the poor. The injustices we see on the daily are being blatantly ignored by those on Capitol Hill.
This time is different because we've had enough. We've had enough of having more guns than people here in America. This time is different because this isn't about politics, it's about morality. Not right and left, but right and wrong. And that doesn't just mean thoughts and prayers. That means courage and action.
Protests also got underway in Parkland, Florida, the location of a 2018 high school shooting that saw 17 students lose their lives. Survivors of the attack delivered impassioned pleas for Congress to revamp its gun laws. March for Our Lives, the gun safety group which played a key role in organizing the nationwide rallies, was founded by survivors of the Parkland shooting. In New York City, Mayor Eric Adams led activists across the Brooklyn Bridge. Protesters later gathered in parks throughout the Big Apple. Addressing the demonstrations, US President Joe Biden said his message to all participants was keep marching. Biden added that he is mildly optimistic about the future of legislative negotiations aiming to tackle gun violence. The US House of Representatives has so far passed bills to raise the age limit required to purchase semi-automatic weapons. Daniel Rell, TVB News.
Sri Lanka is suffering its worst economic crisis since independence, and with its foreign exchange reserves almost depleted and citizens struggling to get by, the country's Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe said it may resort to buying oil from Russia and asking China for more loans. Nazvi Karim reports.
Ranil Wickremesinghe is 1 month into his 6th stint as Sri Lanka's Prime Minister. It is also his most challenging as he tries to fix an economic crisis of his country's own making, but worsened by Russia's war with Ukraine. Also the finance minister, Wickremesinghe must find fuel and basic food items for a country desperately lacking in both. And as he told the Associated Press, he's willing to get them from anywhere, even if it means risking relations with countries that have heaped sanctions on Russia.
We need the fuel, and now we are negotiating with private suppliers. The issue here is that there's a lot of oil going around which can be sourced back informally to Iran or to Russia. So sometimes you may not know what oil you are buying, but we are looking at other sources of oil fuel that are traditional sources from the Middle East, where we've been taking, where we have been purchasing fuel. We will, yes, if we can get from any other sources, we'll get from there, otherwise they may have to go to Russia again.
Reports say Sri Lanka paid almost $73 million 2 weeks ago for 90,000 metric tons of Russian crude to restart its only refinery. Wickremesinghe was appointed a month ago to replace Mahinda Rajapaksa, brother of the president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Mahinda, along with other relatives of the president holding high-profile posts in the government, was forced out after thousands of people took part in protests, some burning down the private houses of politicians allied with the Rajapaksas. Sri Lanka has amassed $51 billion in foreign debt, but has suspended repayment of nearly $7 billion due this year. Among its major creditors is China, who has offered to provide more loans but is reluctant to restructure Sri Lanka's current debt obligations.
Chinese interest rates are higher than the soft loans of the Japanese, but still it is lower than the commercial bank. We've been talking with China. Chinese have their own system of how they give relief, but China has agreed to come in with the other countries to give relief to Sri Lanka, which is the first step, which means that they all have to agree how the cuts are to take place and in what manner it should take place.
Okay. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
Back locally, Financial Secretary Paul Chan will announce more details of the next batch of $5,000 consumption vouchers in the coming week. This was revealed in Chan's blog post today. 2 more payment platforms, BOC Pay and PayMe from HSBC, will be available for eligible residents to collect the vouchers, bringing the total number of such platforms to 6. Those who choose to use the same platform as in the past don't have to go through any registration. The government will check the previously registered information so that the public can receive the vouchers without any delay. The Legislative Council passed a much-anticipated Labour bill abolishing the MPF offsetting mechanism, which will prohibit employers from using their employees' pensions for severance and long service payments. The Commissioner for Labour said that employers may not be able to avoid severance and long service payments by rehiring the same group of employees on short-term contracts. Timothy Lee has more.
Set to take effect in 2025, questions have been raised on why the offsetting mechanism will take more than 2 years to abolish. Chris Sun, the Commissioner for Labour, noted the abolition date of the offsetting mechanism is determined by when the electronic MPF platform becomes operational.
For the MPF system, it involves hundreds of thousands of employers and millions of employees. So when it comes to implementation, it takes a very effective low-cost eMPF platform, which is being developed right now and is scheduled to be ready and up and running by 2025. The actual implementation of the abolition of the MPF offsetting will have to wait until 2025.
Some employers indicated they may switch to rehiring employees on short-term contracts to avoid paying severance and long service payments to those who have worked for 2 to 5 years respectively. However, Sun noted that the authorities may hold a different view and see the employees on short-term contracts as being continuously hired. He reassured employers that the combined payments will only account for 0.35% of their business's operating costs. After the abolition of the MPF offsetting mechanism, the government will subsidize affected employers for a designated period of time, but encourage employers to save money in a special savings account. Secretary for Labour and Welfare, Luo Huining, said on his blog that the government will introduce another bill to help employers save for severance and long service payments in the next legislative year. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
And that's the news. Thanks for watching.